Hi, my name is Deanna Kluth. I am going to share with you about tracking today. There is a teaching I learned called stalking the death that stalks you. And I learned this from my teachers who learned it from Dr. Alberto Violdo, who learned it from his teachers, indigenous Inca shamans in Peru, who listened to the call of the ancestors to share this wisdom, this indigenous wisdom, that it was time to share it with the descendants of the European uninvited guests of Turtle Island. And what I want to share with you today is the way I've been tracking. Tracking is a really important tool and, yes, navigational tool in working with healing, in whether it's really all connected. My personal journey as a human on this planet and every tangential experience, whether it's as a parent, as a friend, remembering my childhood, as a daughter, as a practitioner or employee, you name it, there is a partner, there is there are keys in each of these experiences, if we track them, that open doors to forgotten pathways, places where aspects of ourselves may have been separated from wholeness and integration, either in this lifetime or in our cellular memory. This energy of separation and those strands or threads that are woven throughout the field, the fabric of the field, that are reactionary, that are triggered in its feelings of being separate and not belonging to the whole, not integrated. So the question repeatedly is, what have I not yet integrated back into wholeness? And there are journeys you can take. The one I learned is a shape-shifting journey where you become the tracker. And in the dream time, jungle, Amazon, tracking as jaguar. There are many other lineages and ways that utilize this journeying method, these tools of shape-shifting, journeying with elements, with nature. And they can also be woven in to places that are more right brain consciousness and linear thought processes. So we do this ebb and flow. I do this ebb and flow of integrating wisdom from the dream time and journaling and analyzing experiences with felt senses, and just putting the pieces together and integrating. And in this way, I managed to gain and glean more insights and awaken into consciousness what is dormant and subconscious or unconscious. All my conscious life, I've been tracking the mystery of life, of my lineage, of my mother. It was something that came naturally to connect the dots. And as I continued to do this and then gain more experience and mastery of living and journeying in this way, with weaving in all the additional training I've had from different teachings, and I'm so grateful for having crossed paths with and received and been conscious enough to walk through those doors as they were presented to me, because it's allowed me to heal, it's allowed me to grow and experience life in a very enriching, fulfilling way that is not easy, is not ignorantly blissful, but that opens my heart and deepens my connections with people and expands my community, my place, my belonging in beautiful relationship, right relationships with people, plants, animals, my family, and the work continues and continues. So I want to share, and these may seem like separate points, tangential experiences that are unrelated, but I will show you how they presented a picture as I plotted the connections, as I dreamed, as I reviewed and wrote and got a bird's eye view and new insights. So these separate points of experience, yesterday morning, sitting out in the backyard with my partner, doing some spiritual work and just being connected and being connected in nature, we noticed, or I saw a cicada that took me by surprise. And it was quiet in its presence, just in really close proximity, just half an arm's reach away on the lounge chair. And all around us, its community was singing in chorus. And yet this one, right at the center of this circle of community, was silent and present and beautiful. And I've never seen one up close like that, still alive in its shell, in its exoskeleton. Right? I've seen and come across what remains after it's emerged out of its shell. So there was a lot of wisdom and teaching that came through in that experience about emergence and presence, and the singing of its song, right, in the family song, and yet its individual silence, and the power of its presence, of its silent presence in just being. This was a very deep lesson for me that touched a lot, and maybe it touches you on a collective plane as well, surely. So then, cut to last night as I called my 11-year-old down to dinner. There was still some things to do, and in order not to overwhelm her, I set one task at a time. And as one was ending, I offered her another, little tasks like bring this to the table, bring this out to the back porch. And and I asked her to bring me the colander, and she just flipped out with overwhelm and stressing. I was stressing her out, and I realized later it would have been helpful for me to invite her to help me, to ask her if she'd be willing to assist and I could give her tasks. So she knew what was coming rather than just like in that moment being unable to understand and process and switch gears. And she was probably a little hangry. So she had this huge, and she's 11 and going, moving into her menarche. Lots of things are shifting emotionally and psychically and intellectually. So I had this reaction to her being unable to process and basically losing her shit. And my hands were wet from the dishes, and I had in this fit of rage and impulse that I've had before, having been raised by a father unable to hold emotion and needing to follow the prescription of society to spank, so there's this violence that many of us were raised with as an impulsive reaction to overwhelm, to some sort of assault on our senses, right? So this is something I've been journeying with as a parent, being able to hold space for the reality and depth of all our emotions that these children have. They're huge, and we have them just as big. And eventually learn to either mask them, control them, suppress them, or express them in healthy ways. So my daughter's still on the journey with that. And we all are, and are learning as we go. But I accentuated what I was saying by flicking what remained of the water in my hands at her shoulder. And that is, it's a an attack. It's a physical, energetic attack that I did in my rage response that I realized and journeyed with later moves through me. I mean, it's not an unknown. I've done a lot of work with so many of the reasons why I would be outraged. I mean, there are so many reasons to be outraged about the way things are and the way these systems of oppression that for generations have been in place, abusing and taking away our sovereign right, our authority, our will, controlling us. And so I've been journeying as a conscious parent with unschooling and really unschooling myself and creating space for these kids to never have their freedom taken away from them. And it's so tricky because it brings up so much, and there's so many nuances, right? Developing respect for self and other while maintaining that respect for self and other, especially with these little people and ourselves. It's really been a deep spiritual dive. So this moment happened. It was resolved later. I apologized and acknowledged how I might have approached it differently to begin with. But I want to move then to a dream I had last night. And it also may seem tangential, but it had an element where it kind of reenacted and described this sense of frustration and lack of empathy, perhaps, with someone else's inability to cope. And what it was about, that inability to cope, was about shame. So this is where it seems tangentially different, a different process, where there was a shame in the fact that here I was in the dream, sitting on a toilet with the door opened, and from this perspective, there was a divergent view. I was sitting at a crossroads, and in one angle trajectory, I saw a street with our car, and one of my daughters got out of the car and left the door open, and I'm saying, the door, shut the door. And she's daydreaming and then shuts the door, and then annoyed, like, kind of goes around the other way and goes back inside, inside this wooden castle with iron hinges, you know, kind of like a cabin, but I think from a time period long ago, right? And on the other trajectory, down the left side, from my perspective, on the throne, was a school hallway with teens and tweens being let out of school and coming towards me, my direction. And a bunch of tall boys came into the bathroom, and at first, you know, noticed me, but I kind of shrugged, like, oh, well, you know, I'm here. I left the door open because I really had to pee and didn't think it was important to close the door. But so then they just ignored me. It was no big deal after that initial, like, oh. and went about their business, chattering away like school kids do. But this other young girl, a friend of my daughter's, in the dream, was hyperventilating with shame about this, what she was seeing about me being on the toilet in public. And she like nearly fainted and was, saying how basically how shameful this was. So there was this shame of our nature, our sexuality, our being. And I, helped her up, but in a very frustrated way, like frustrated at this. I'm like, it's okay, it's okay. And earlier in the dream, there was this dance, and I was leading this dance and holding hands with family and friends, a small group, several people, and I was sort of doing a belly dance hip, showing them how to move their hips, and we moved to the left, right? And I was taking the lead, and they were following my lead until we got to the king. I led them to the king and then took his hand, and then we followed his lead. Now, what came through with this dream and all these elements when I went to share in a circle, a spiritual circle I'm a member of, I was looking for a picture, and the picture of the cicada came up and just immediately linked back up. And I thought, yes, this is connected. And the teaching of this dance and this sensuality and this experience with my daughter and weaving it all back together, I, was remembering just this shame of my first experiences of pleasure, of sexuality, being so fraught with shame, and how that was anchored in me at that age, especially, then compounded with that time period that is a rite of passage into adulthood, that teen to tween menarche, and also seeing how much a part of this sort of pent up anger, rage, shame, frustration that is then triggered to release is living in me. It was anchored in me from the field as separate, as a separation from the field. So it doesn't belong and wants to belong, and hates that it doesn't connect when it doesn't feel connected, and gets angry and moves through me, through us, as something that has not yet been integrated. And I see how also these pieces connect back to the sister wound, and how my sister and I are still recovering. Now that we're nearing our 50s, we're finally recovering from that state of separation where I exerted control and reacted in rage and inability to cope, and turned that, introjected that perception of my feelings being too big, too much, and unacceptable. And thus completely overwhelming eventually. So how I really inflicted harm on my younger sister at that age. And yet there is a split in that longing to connect and really wanting the connection and wanting to be in loving, right relationship and not knowing how and really grasping for it and, you know, scratching, pulling. So healing that within me so that I don't then project it out and perpetuate that. And it pains me to see some of that playing out between my daughters. And I'm working really hard to create space and consciousness around that. And figuring it out as I go. But realizing now in this tracking that there are these new dots that have emerged that are connected and that are such keys to unlock and open and release and reintegrate these elements that were hidden before. And so to say, this is me healing. The tracking is so key, so important. I'm doing it all the time. The work, constantly doing the work in these subtle ways. And if I were really a tracker and really knew how to track in the forest, I've learned a little bit, but they're really subtle clues that an untrained eye wouldn't see at all. So not to say that you can't do it, but just bring your consciousness to it, right? Look for it. Look for these lessons. Look for the connections. Look for how the weaving of your life and your experiences interrelate, whether tangentially or directly. And then look at your dreams and the relevance of those dreams that happen around the same time period. And the vista it opens up from past, present, and into future evolution. Tracking in multi-dimensions, because we exist in multiple dimensions, right? We are energy that has materialized this body. We are souls and spirits inhabiting this vessel that our energy has materialized. Through time and space, our lineages and our ancestors live and move through us, right? Again, weaving those tangents as well and listening to their voices, whether they come through an animal, an insect, a plant, using all that medicine for the good of all, evolving yourself, evolving your relationships, to be in right relationship in your community, finding your gifts to be able to serve yourself, your family, your community. Like a drop of water, expanding outward from that centered stillness of being in an integrated place of love, right? When we are whole and integrated, there are no cracks, there are no fissures leaking your energy or allowing negativity in, right? The fullness of you expands. You fill yourself up with the sun. Oh yes, I want to add another integration piece. I went for a walk today to the library um, to get some books before we go on our trip to visit my sister and her twins. And the sun was out, and it was still early enough that it wasn't this oppressive heat. And I was just soaking up the sun and the power of the sun and feeling that solar energy really connected with this Lionsgate portal moving into August 8th. And here is the sun opening up right now. Um, and as I walked, hearing all the cicadas singing their chorus and connecting that with the dance, the sacred dance that I dreamed of, and allowing my nature to sway in its natural rhythm, right? Just releasing any constriction that I was raised to be ashamed of, my hips, the sway of my not so small derriere, and allowing my body to be free. Um, Felt so good, and um, and shameless and liberating, and really, once we are able to integrate some of these charged pieces, we bring them into consciousness in this way, tracking, putting pieces together, integrating, understanding intellectually, physically, emotionally, spiritually, really that multidimensional experience. Any charge, any shame, or whatever it might be, dissipates. The fear of being seen in this instance is dissipating in tracking and in the medicine received from the cicada and the dream. And this has been a long journey, right? This is the latest piece, where then stepping it out into yet another tangent is how it relates to then being seen and stepping into my sovereign power, the seat, right, of our being in the fullness of our energy. And that can be threatening to people who fear that in themselves. So, and now this is tricky, because one of the insights I had through all these lessons and through this dreaming was the projection that I put outward from that place of separateness, right? And shame or rage, and jealousy and hatred that I put onto, say, my daughter in this experience, in that, reactive expulsion of energy from within. That also is what I've been afraid of coming at me by stepping into a more public role. And I realize in this teaching is that the more I integrate, release, and dissolve and merge all these threads into wholeness, the less afraid I am of the shadows of my projections returning to me, and any projections from others coming at me. Because in being so centered and grounded, and so much of that solar energy filling up where those cracks used to be, it doesn't I won't take them in. I don't have to be afraid of those shadows anymore. You see? So much to track, so much to put together, and the pieces fall into place and make so much sense. And maybe this doesn't make sense to all of you right now. I hope it does to some of you who are ready to receive it. And to the others, I trust that on a soul level, you are integrating this wisdom and this work slowly, as I have, very slowly. That's been my way, molasses, turtle way. And I honor that. That's what works for me. And I've realized it's also in line with embracing the feminine and letting go of this more masculine, patriarchal way of pushing, doing. Yeah, we need that masculine energy of action and execution to manifest, right? But the gestation, that's where the creation evolves to be birthed. So yeah, that's where the tracking in this metaphor happens, right? As we're evolving and putting the pieces together, shape shifting, morphing into the fullness of the potential that we are, of our being. So I encourage you to track, maybe journal, draw, paint, make little notes, or just keep it in mind and be conscious and know, be open to receive an expanded awareness of how things are interrelated. Thank you for listening. I just came back from this walk, did a little stretching and yoga, and had to get on and share. This is what the medicine wanted to be for this moon. So blessings, blessings. Plant those seeds. Enjoy the summer sun. Connect with yourself, with your family, and slow down and make the space to track and connect the dots of this great mystery. Namaste.